Welcome to Chapter 8. In Chapter 8, we'll talk about organizing information technology services. So how do we essentially establish the team and what does it look like? So here's some of the key elements that we'll talk about today. And again, this just really focuses on how do we align the organization and what some of the roles are within the organization. So we'll talk about the core functions of IT, some of the roles within that in the leadership space, in the staffing space. And I'll have a little bit of a conversation of do we centralize or decentralize? And the answer is both, and I'll explain why. We'll talk about the importance of being innovative and agile. Talk a little bit about the outsourcing and how that's evolved over especially the last decade, really. And then again, more on how do we evaluate the effectiveness. So first, let's talk about what the core functions of the IT department are within the organization. And I'll say that, you might see different factions of this, but for the most part, it's pretty consistent from health system to health system. You're always going to have what you call ops and or tech support. And again, these are the people that keep the lights on, right? So they're sure that the core servers, your network, all your databases, all the workstations are functional. They handle, the basic installation of new technology. They do the troubleshooting. They're responsible for system backups and the help desk, if you will. Okay. Applications management. This is the team that works on how do we acquire those new systems? How do we, configure and implement them? That ongoing enhancement process. And you notice there's troubleshooting here as well. So both of these functions, ops and tech support, as well as application management, both have elements of troubleshooting. So if you think of it this way, operations and tech support, that's typically what we call your tier one support. These are the people that help with password resets, help you when you can't log on, stuff like where's the printer, it's not printing correctly, how do I upgrade my account, things like that. Whereas you get into applications management, it's some of that same stuff, but more specific to the application. For example, a support ticket to the applications management team or the tier 2 team, if you will, is more of that. I'm in the EHR and I'm trying to figure out how to build a titrated dose and I don't know how to do it. Okay, so those are kind of your fundamental differences. Then most organizations will have, various specialty groups. And again, this just depends on what the institution is all about. Okay, so let me give you a good example. If you have an institution that specializes in oncology, you might have an oncology IT team that focuses on all the technology around oncology. Another example is in an academic teaching hospital. They're likely going to be a separate team that handles the academic technology, if you will. So the stuff that the researchers are using, the supercomputers, the specialized research databases, that sort of thing. And then, of course, every organization is going to have IT administration. Okay, so what does the leadership team look like? These are the people that handle things like contracts, the budget, the strategic plan, and also have oversight to the physical space that IT resides in. Okay, so what are some of those top roles in senior leadership within IT? Okay, the top of the heap is the CIO, the Chief Information Officer. Okay, this is the person, he or she sits at the table with the CEO, the other C-level positions, and they have input to the strategic vision, the direction of the organization in terms of technology. They're the voice at the top that helps to make sure that the rest of the organization understands the priorities of IT and helps to support them. Also, a role that has emerged in the last decade and also typically sits, at the C-suite is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer. And this individual focuses a little bit more on some of that technical infrastructure, being sure it's up to date, okay, that it fits the need of the business. And they're the ones that manages the emerging technology. Now, the big difference here is the CIO will likely have way more staff under them than the CTO. Both important roles, but they do very different tasks. Another role that has also recently made it to the C-suite is something called the Chief Information Security Officer. And oftentimes the nomenclature you'll hear is CISO, C-I-S-O. Okay? These are the people that are responsible for that overall security plan. Okay, being sure that our systems are safe, we're not vulnerable to cyber attacks, we're not vulnerable to viruses, we're not vulnerable to phishing schemes, all of those things. And an unpopular opinion that I'll share that the book really isn't going to talk about, the whole reason that this position was created and made its way up to the top of the C-suite is simply this. As years have passed, organizations have become more and more vulnerable to cyber attacks. Leadership wanted a voice at the top, and essentially, this is the unpopular opinion part, they wanted a single throat to choke. So when something went wrong and the hospital got taken over by, cyber ransom, the CEO wants someone to turn to and say, this is your problem, go fix it. So that's the CISO. Also, that sits at the table at the C level that has a lot to do with technology is the CMIO, the Chief Medical Information Officer, sometimes also called the Chief Medical Informatics Officer. All right. This is another one of these roles that has emerged in the last 15 years, roughly. I will say that in every example but two that I've seen, this role is filled by a physician, either an MD or a DO. With the exception, I saw two health systems that they had someone that their credentials were in nursing in that position, but I would argue they were the right person for that job. They had tons of experience in implementing new systems, working with physicians. One of them had actually held the role of chief nursing officer. So like I said, mostly filled with the physician. Again, that said, I've seen other people than physicians be successful in this space. Okay, so when we think a little bit about a CIO, let's think for a minute, what are some of those key attributes of a high-performing CIO? And this came from Chime, which is a pretty popular leadership organization in healthcare. But as you can see, here's some of the big things, right? And really it's intentional that number one is vision and strategy, right? They have to be able to see the forest through the trees, right? Of course, integration, a change driver. They have to be that person at the top that instills confidence in the technology, one that builds partnerships, not only with customers, but I would argue with your users. And of course, your customers would, you could argue is your users, but also your patient population, right? Ensures you got the right talent, okay? And then also continues to build a network of people, right? Some of the roles that get a lot of attention in the IT space are the role of the project leader, right? So this is the person that manages the projects, right? And big organizations are going to have several of these, okay? So they implement and deploy all the infrastructure. They manage the project plan. They spend roughly 80% of their time communicating. Systems analysts, these are your boots on the ground. These are the people that do things like figure out your strategy. They look at your workflow. They optimize the system to the workflow and build accordingly. Okay. They will sometimes do those cost benefit analysis. They'll look at that ROI on a system to determine, are we going down the right path? Now, the programmer, this is an interesting role. Used to be organizations employed a lot of programmers for all the various tasks in-house. And here you can see there's a couple different types. The text calls out an applications programmer, in which they're, writing, updating packages to software, they're customizing, and then a systems programmer that they're doing stuff on the back end with the databases, with the servers, doing what we call operations jobs to do a variety of things. If you want to get more in the weeds on this, feel free to give me a call. I did a lot of this early on in my days and happy to talk a little bit more, but I don't want to go too far off topic here. So that said, a lot of health systems have moved away from the in-house programmer model and they are outsourcing this. So you'll use a third-party organization to meet your needs here. And the main reason is work in this space often ebbs and flows. And it's sometimes in your medium-sized organizations, it's tough to have enough work to keep a programmer busy. Database administrator. is what it sounds like. This is the person that works with the database. They ensure the database is up to date, it's optimized, it's backed up, it's secure, it's always available. They handle all of those tasks. This, again, is another position that we are seeing get outsourced. And this one isn't so much because of they don't stay busy all the time. It's sometimes hard to maintain this talent. And I'll talk a little bit more about that here a few slides down the road when we talk about in-house versus outsourcing. Every organization, big or small, is most likely going to have a network administrator. These are the people that do just that. They maintain the network. They ensure that everything works, that all the systems connect, that everything works the way it should. As we talk about the IoT, or Internet of Things, as you will, the role of the network administrator continues to grow. So what do I mean by that? Well, now we have everybody in the organization carrying a cell phone around for the most part. We also have tablet devices that are getting used. It gets more complex with a lot of times we're using what's called a BYOD model, bring your own device. So you have people bringing in their own cell phones to connect onto the network. And then in the last decade, what has become incredibly prolific is the use of voice over IP phone systems. So what used to be a very segregated system, the phone system running on, old phone cable, is no longer the case. And now we're running that over the Ethernet. So the network administrator now also has oversight to all of the telephony as well, which adds more responsibilities to them. Okay. So what does it take to have a high performing IT staff on board? Obviously, flawless execution. They are excellent consultants. They provide very good support. They stay current in their field. And I'll say many of these become a challenge, right? It is very tough to have a team that has all of these attributes, getting people to stay current, ensuring that the support is just top notch. And I'd also add, while not on the slide, they have got to be absolutely impeccable communicators. Communication is important in every job, but when you look at the role of IT staff, it's a little unique in the healthcare environment. And the reason I say that is you have to have a lot of situational awareness. So by that, what I'm talking about is, how a IT person will interact with a CIO versus how they interact with a doctor versus a nurse versus a med tech versus a reg clerk versus a patient. Okay. And you might think, well, why is IT staff interacting with patients? Sometimes working help desk tickets in relation to the patient portal is possible. So you're going to interact with all of those people maybe slightly differently. And a good IT person is really almost like a chameleon. They can just morph to their environment and just flawlessly start to engage at the right level for the right person and for the right situation. When I used to work with CIOs, I would, of course, engage with them very differently when things were going well versus when we had a down system. Okay, so there's two ways to set up your IT, centralized and decentralized. And the answer is we're doing both. Okay, some things are going to be centralized, some are going to be decentralized, and almost every organization has some type of hybrid. Okay, if I'm centralized, if I'm entirely centralized, my hardware and software is hopefully very standardized. Okay, I can be incredibly efficient in how I administer my resources. It removes some of the complexity from my staffing and training issues. It's easier to use a shared systems approach, makes the strategic plan a heck of a lot easier, and senior management has a lot more oversight. Okay, but if I look to the other side, if I go decentralized, I can fit business need a whole lot better. Okay, it being smaller, I can hopefully respond quicker, and I have a better pulse on what the end users are looking for. Okay, and it helps me to be a little more innovative in how I use the technology. Okay. So when you think about those core IT competencies, the organization should play a big role in establishing them, but also there's outside contributing factors as well, right? So you look at the outside environment, pressures from federal and state, accrediting bodies and licensure and all that stuff can play a role to what our competencies need to be, okay? So we need to think through that. And the text calls out here, getting an A+ from the customer matters. Okay. And what I always like to ask when I go into these organizations to kind of provide assistance is I always ask the question, who's your customer? Okay. And then the follow-up question to that always is, if you don't take care of the customer, where do they go? Okay. And that'll help you to establish, what those priorities are. And, spoiler alert, the customer here is both the patient and the end users. Okay. When we look across a department, one characteristic we like to see is an agile department. So we talk a lot about agility. Unfortunately, I guess depending on your preferences, some people aren't fans. Healthcare changes very quickly. Priorities are constantly shifting. And for some people, that just simply does not work very well. So we do have to be agile. We've got to be prepared to flex very quickly and change direction based on internal and external factors. We've got to be highly innovative. Okay. So we've got to have people that kind of look outside of the box, if you will, to solve problems, to come up with new approaches. And one thing I like that the text calls out, this last point here, is letting staff members kind of step away to either sabbatical or intern elsewhere to just get an idea of what's going on. Okay. When I worked for Cerner, one of the things they made me do as a programmer after I'd been there about a year was actually go on site and help end users when we had turned the system on. And for me, it was a big eye opener to really see and understand what some of the struggles were that the end users were dealing with. And it helped me learn a lot about how things happen at the end user in front of patients and cultural issues and all of those things. So it can be very valuable, but unfortunately, a lot of business leaders don't do it because it takes time and resources to pull it off. Now, the battle always is, do I outsource or do I keep it in-house? And again, my answer is it's both. As the cloud has become more and more prominent and cloud services are easier to use and cost effective, we tend to see more and more organizations look to outsource. Okay. This is especially important in the hospital environment for a number of reasons. Okay. Number one, if you're in a major metropolitan area, it can be really tough to retain top talent. You're always going to have the hospital next door trying to steal your talent away. Also, in terms of outsourcing, it can be a challenge to have the physical space for my infrastructure. So I will oftentimes want to outsource that to a managed data center. Okay. A lot of organizations, will let Microsoft be the one that handles their email. Microsoft will actually keep that email server in Microsoft's cloud. And all I need on site is an internet connection. Okay. EHR vendors have started moving their services to the cloud. HR systems have been moved to the cloud. Okay. All of these things have started to move for all of those reasons. As an organization, I don't have to worry about retaining talent to support these systems. I don't have to have the physical space on where I need to place these servers. And I also have room for growth, whereas the major nightmare of a hospital IT leader is we need to find a space for 3 more servers and we're out of room. If I've got that outsourced, I can rely on the vendor. I don't have to go through this big process to make room, order the servers, get them on site, configure them, get them up and running, and monitor them. I simply just send a request to my cloud vendor and say, I need 3 more servers with this amount of RAM, this size of storage device, and configured on this operating system, and I need it right away. And usually it happens pretty quick. All you do is write a check. One thing we talk about a lot in IT is what we call governance. And these are essentially the rules and strategies that we use to align our direction to the overall strategic goals. Okay. We also talk about, budget. Everyone deals with the budget. Are we spending enough? Are we spending too little? And the answer is it depends. Depends on what we're doing. Okay. There are certainly years where we have to spend more on IT, and then there's years where we can scale back a little bit. It just depends on what's happening. Okay. The other thing we talk about is what we call service levels, right? You'll often hear the expression SLA, which is an acronym for service level agreement. And you see these at help desks, at data centers. And essentially, it's just an agreement that says, we agree that every help desk ticket will be resolved or closed within 24 hours. So within 24 hours, we're going to fix your problem. Okay. And if not, sometimes there's a consequence to that. So with that, when we talk about an SLA, one of the things we look at is what's called, our evaluation of IT effectiveness. So a few things factor into that, and you can see them here. Reliability. So how many times, what percentage of time do we have unscheduled downtime? So unscheduled downtime essentially means we didn't expect the system to be down, and it is, as opposed to scheduled downtime where you get a notice that says, Tuesday from midnight to 2 a.m., the system will be down to take database updates. That's scheduled. That's okay. That doesn't affect your reliability because I can control when that happens. Unscheduled downtime, you can't control. And Murphy's Law, it typically happens at the worst possible time. And I'll tell you, in healthcare, the vendors that are providing SLAs around unscheduled downtime, they've got this down to minutes per month. Okay. So when I left the data hosting business, it was agreements that said the system would be up 99.9% of the time was very common. So that's about 6 minutes of unscheduled downtime a month, which is next to nothing. Okay. What we call response time, and that's just how quick the application works. Do I see an hourglass when I clicked on a screen to load? Nothing will agitate an end user more than getting long screen load times. Okay. What we'll call resiliency. If the system goes down, how resilient is it? How quick can we get it back up? Okay. And then also we talk about measuring what we call our software bugs. That's kind of slang. Really, the proper vernacular here is software defect. Okay. So how many defects do we see in the code? As those could cause us a lot of problems. Okay. And again, some of the characteristics that we look at are core IT, needs here, right? We have to have the human capital. We have to manage it. We have to have the platform. We have to manage it the same way. We have to be strategic. We have to manage our budget, our finances. We have to show value. And what a lot of IT organizations don't do well is articulate that value. Kind of the old adage is everything's going great in IT. What are we paying those guys for? And then the other thing is nothing seems to work in IT. What are we paying those guys for? Okay. So it's communicating that value that a lot of business leaders just don't do the best job of. Okay. So again, we talked about the core functions in IT. We talked about some of those roles at the leadership level and also the staffing level. We talked about centralized versus decentralized, agility. Outsourcing versus not versus in-house. And like I said, if you want to talk more about that, let me know. This is something I've done quite a bit of and can talk ad nauseum about. So, and then of course, IT service levels as well. And also again, some of those core metrics around, what do we have that's SLA and has service level agreements and those core IT processes. Okay, so that concludes chapter 8, and please let me know if you have any questions.